In 1930, the United States government passed a single law. One law. It was supposed to protect American farmers. Instead, it triggered the largest collapse in global trade in recorded history. 25 countries retaliated within months. International commerce fell by 65%. The Great Depression, which was already bad, became catastrophic. The law was called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. You have almost certainly never studied it in depth. You probably only know the name because of a single scene from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But right now, in 2026, economists at every major institution, from Dartmouth to Yale, from the IMF to the World Economic Forum, are saying the exact same thing in public. They are saying we are watching 1930 happen again. And this time, the numbers are bigger. This is not a political video. I am not interested in whether today's tariffs are good or bad. I am interested in what happened the last time, in precise historical detail. I want to show you the exact mechanism that turned a domestic trade dispute into a global economic catastrophe. Because that mechanism is running again, right now. And if history is the guide, we have maybe 18 months before the consequences become impossible to ignore. Act 1. The setup. To understand the catastrophe of 1930, you have to understand the delusion of 1928. America was experiencing the greatest economic boom in human history. The stock market was an unstoppable engine of wealth. The industrial cities of the North were producing more steel, more cars, and more electricity than the rest of the world combined. But beneath the surface of the Roaring Twenties, a massive structural fracture was opening up. And it started in the dirt. While Wall Street was partying, American agriculture was quietly suffocating. During World War I, European farms had been destroyed, so American farmers borrowed heavily to expand and feed the world. But by the late 1920s, Europe had recovered. Global crop supplies surged. Prices collapsed. An American farmer who was making great money in 1919 was practically bankrupt by 1928. Enter Herbert Hoover. When Hoover ran for president in 1928, he made a fatal campaign promise. He promised the farmers he would protect them by raising tariffs on imported agricultural goods. The logic was simple. Tax foreign food, make it more expensive, and Americans will be forced to buy American crops instead. It was supposed to be a limited, targeted intervention. But Hoover made a severe political miscalculation. Once he opened the door to protectionism, every industry in America decided to walk through it. The bill went to the House Ways and Means Committee, chaired by Representative Willis Hawley, and the Senate Finance Committee, chaired by Senator Reed Smoot. What followed was a masterclass in political greed. If the farmers were getting protection, the steel manufacturers wanted protection too. If steel got it, textiles wanted it. Glass makers, shoe manufacturers. The bill ballooned out of control. Lobbyists swarmed Washington in a frenzy of log rolling, a political term for, you vote for my tariff, I'll vote for yours. By the time the bill was finished, it didn't just protect farmers. It raised tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods. It pushed the average tax on dutiable imports to a staggering 40 to 60%. It was the most punitive, sweeping protectionist legislation in American history. And the people who understood the financial system knew exactly what was about to happen. In May 1930, as the bill sat on Hoover's desk, something unprecedented occurred. 1,028 economists, representing virtually every major university and financial institution in the country, signed a desperate public petition begging the president to veto the act. They warned that it would not protect American industry. They warned that it would force foreign countries to retaliate. They warned it would destroy American exports. But politically, Hoover felt trapped by his campaign promise. On June 17, 1930, he ignored the 1,028 economists, and he signed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act into law. The trap was sprung. The countdown had begun. Act 2. The mechanism. When politicians talk about tariffs, they talk about them as if the rest of the world is a static video game NPC that simply accepts whatever rules America dictates. Smoot-Hawley proved that international trade is not a single-player game. It is a highly sensitive, interconnected nervous system. When you strike it, it strikes back. Immediately. Let's look at the precise mechanism of how a domestic law collapsed the world. The retaliation didn't take years. It took weeks. America's largest trading partner was Canada. At the time, Canada exported massive amounts of eggs, dairy, and timber to the U.S. Smoot-Hawley hit those exports with a sledgehammer. Canada was furious. They immediately drafted emergency legislation raising tariffs on virtually everything America sold to them. American exports to Canada plummeted. Then it spread to Europe. Spain passed the Ways tariff, specifically targeting American cars and tires, completely crushing U.S. auto exports to the Iberian Peninsula. Switzerland, infuriated by a new U.S. tax on luxury watches, boycotted American typewriters and meat. France implemented a strict quota system, legally capping the amount of American goods allowed across their borders. Italy slapped massive taxes on American wheat and radios. Within 2 years, roughly 24 countries had erected massive trade walls against the United States. Here is the forensic financial data of what happened next. Pay close attention to these numbers, because they are the core of why historians fear this mechanism. In 1929, before the tariffs, American businesses exported $7 billion worth of goods. By 1932, American exports had collapsed to $2.5 billion. A 64% wipeout in 3 years. Remember the farmers? The exact people the law was designed to protect? Because foreign countries stopped buying American agricultural products in retaliation, farm exports dropped by 1/3. Prices collapsed even further. The law destroyed the very people it was written to save. But the mechanism didn't stop there. It infected the banking system. Because American factories couldn't sell their goods overseas, the revenue vanished. Because the revenue vanished, they laid off workers. By 1933, U.S. unemployment hit an apocalyptic 25%. Because workers had no income, they defaulted on their mortgages and car loans. Because of the mass defaults, thousands of small and regional banks went completely bankrupt, wiping out the life savings of millions of ordinary people. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff didn't cause the 1929 stock market crash. But economists agree it was the accelerant that turned a severe recession into the Great Depression. By walling off the United States, it destroyed the global flow of capital. World trade literally shrank by 65%. The entire planet went broke at exactly the same time. It was a geopolitical disaster of such scale that it took an 80-year global project to undo the damage. Act 3. The Forgotten Rescuers. By 1933, the United States realized the catastrophic error of protectionism. President Franklin D. Roosevelt entered office, looked at the smoking crater of global trade, and pushed through the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act of 1934. It was the first step in walking the world back from the ledge. It allowed the president to negotiate bilateral tariff reductions with foreign nations. But the true lesson of Smoot-Hawley wasn't fully learned until after the world tore itself apart in World War II. In the aftermath of the war, the architects of the new global system, men like Harry Dexter White and John Maynard Keynes, looked back at 1930 and realized something terrifying. Economic isolationism doesn't just cause poverty, it breeds political extremism. When you collapse a country's economy, you radicalize its population. The trade wars of the 1930s laid the direct economic groundwork for the actual wars of the 1940s. To prevent it from ever happening again, they built institutions. They created the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, in 1947, which later became the World Trade Organization, WTO. The entire purpose of these frameworks was to bind the global economy together, to make retaliatory tariff wars illegal, or at least so economically painful that no rational leader would attempt one. For 80 years, this system held. The consensus among the world's leading economies was absolute. Free trade, despite its flaws, is a geopolitical necessity. Tariffs were viewed as a relic of a dark, ignorant past. From 1947 to 2024, the average U.S. tariff rate steadily marched downward, eventually resting at a negligible 2.4%. Until 2025. Act 4. The 2026 Mirror. Welcome to the present. In January 2026, the effective tariff rate on goods entering the United States hit 10.3%. That is a number that hasn't been seen since 1947. According to data compiled by the Penn-Wharton Budget Model and MAS Economics, in barely 12 months, American trade policy has undergone the most violent, dramatic reversal since Reed Smoot and Willis Hawley walked the halls of Congress. How did we get here so fast? In early 2025, the Trump administration invoked an obscure 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to impose baseline tariffs of up to 25% on Mexico, Canada, and sweeping tariffs on China. When the Supreme Court struck that down as unconstitutional in February 2026, the administration pivoted instantly, using Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 to drop a blanket 10% tariff on the entire world. And just like in 1930, the world is not a static NPC.
The retaliation mechanism is running on schedule. India, a vital geopolitical ally, was hit with U.S. tariffs and immediately pivoted to sign a massive trade agreement with the European Union in January 2026. The EU is advancing the Turnberry Agreement, preparing their own retaliatory walls. China simply absorbed the hit and diverted its exports to the global south. Economic historians are not mincing words. Barry Eichengreen at UC Berkeley and Douglas Irwin at Dartmouth are explicitly warning that we are playing with the exact same fire that burned down the 1930s economy. But here is what should genuinely terrify you. In some ways, 2026 is actually more fragile than 1930. In 1930, if you built a car in Michigan, you used American steel, American rubber, and American glass. You only worried about tariffs when you tried to sell the finished car in Europe. Today, supply chains are infinitely more complex. A single smartphone might cross international borders 25 times before it reaches your pocket. The raw lithium is mined in Australia, refined in China, made into a battery in Japan, assembled into a phone in Vietnam, and sold in Chicago. When you drop a 10% universal tariff on a modern supply chain, you aren't just taxing the final product. You are taxing the components over and over again at every border crossing. The friction compounds. The Tax Foundation and the Yale Budget Lab estimate this is already costing the average American household between $1,500 and $2,800 a year in hidden inflation. Corporate bankruptcies are hitting levels not seen since 2010. We are watching the early chapters of the Smoot-Hawley Playbook being executed line for line. The justification is the same: protecting domestic industry. The political rhetoric is the same. The immediate foreign retaliation is the same. The only question left is whether the final consequence will be the same. The verdict: History's Wealth Playbook, $2,932 and history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Smoot-Hawley teaches us 3 absolute laws of global economics. Number 1, protectionism always triggers retaliation. Number 2, the consequences of trade wars compound much faster than politicians can fix them. And number 3, the people who pay the price are never the people who wrote the law. But history also provides a roadmap for survival. If we are truly entering a sustained era of deglobalization and tariff warfare, we have to look at what the wealthy actually did to protect their capital between 1929 and 1933. During the Great Depression trade collapse, cash and liquidity became king. Because tariffs destroyed corporate earnings, the stock market was a bloodbath. Because international trade stopped, highly leveraged export businesses were wiped out entirely. The individuals who survived and thrived did 3 things. First, they pivoted to hard assets that were insulated from international supply chains. Domestic real estate, particularly productive agricultural land, retained intrinsic value even when the global financial system froze. Second, they focused on necessity over discretionary. Companies that produced basic domestic utilities and essential consumer staples survived the tariff war because people still had to keep the lights on and eat, even if they couldn't afford imported luxury goods. Third, they maintained extreme cash reserves. When the credit markets froze and thousands of banks failed, the people who had liquid capital were able to buy up generational assets, businesses, real estate, infrastructure, for pennies on the dollar. Right now, the world is holding its breath. The United States has initiated a massive stress test on the global economy. Will the system adapt? Will the tariffs be rolled back? Or will the retaliatory spiral drag us down the same dark path that Herbert Hoover walked nearly a century ago? No one knows for sure. But as always, the past is the only reliable guide we have to the future. If you want to understand what's coming next, you have to look backwards. Subscribe to the channel, and let's keep reading the playbook.